Finally getting back to prophecy. Talk a little bit about King David. In 2 Samuel 11, we have the story of the great sin of his life where he coveted his neighbor's wife. He committed adultery with her, and then he murdered her husband and took her to be his own wife. The story is told in a very just the facts manner. It doesn't really make much judgment over what's happening. It just tells you what David did. But at the end of the chapter, the last verse says, "But the thing that David had done was evil in the eyes of the Lord." It depends on which translation you read, whether you get a strong statement like that, or the thing that David had done displeased the Lord, which sounds much less strong in our English-speaking ears. But anyway, it was evil in the eyes of the Lord, so the Lord sent the prophet Nathan to David. And so this is how Nathan prophesied what would happen in 2 Samuel 12. He told him a parable about a rich man who had lots of flocks and herds, and a poor man who had nothing but one lamb. And the rich man had a traveler come visit him, and instead of using one of his own animals to feed the traveler, he stole his neighbor's lamb and fed the traveler with that. And when David heard this story, having been a shepherd, he was furious and said, "This man deserves to die." And his judgment was this man must pay back 4 sheep because he had done this terrible thing, which was the law of Moses. If you stole a sheep, you had to pay back 4 sheep. And so David, in his anger at this man, was hit really hard by Nathan's reply, which was, "You are the man." David was obviously the rich man, Uriah was the poor man, and the lamb was Bathsheba. He stole Bathsheba from Uriah, and not only that, he murdered Uriah. So what was God's judgment as to what would happen to David? David confessed, "I have sinned against the Lord," and Nathan told David that God had forgiven him, but the punishment would be very severe. He says, "The sword will never depart from your house." He said that while David secretly stole Bathsheba, he would raise up an enemy against him who would openly, in front of all Israel, steal David's women. And all of this happened. The first thing that happened was God said, "Because you have given great opportunity for the enemies of the Lord to blaspheme, the child she has will die." So David knows he's going to lose one son here. Although when the child is sick, David prays and fasts and hopes that God will be gracious and let the child live. After the child dies, David accepts the fact that the child is dead. When the child died, his servants were afraid to tell him. They were afraid he would do himself harm. So David was very much affected by his own actions and the consequences that were coming from it. One point about Bathsheba: not a single negative thing is ever said about Bathsheba in the Bible. It's quite likely that Bathsheba is a victim of a powerful man and not an accomplice. It may be that she had no real choice in the matter of when she was fetched to go to the king's house that night. Okay, so David has lost one son. Next thing that happens is his son Amnon wants his half-sister Tamar. Amnon rapes Tamar. And Tamar's full brother Absalom is absolutely furious that this has happened, and he kills Amnon. That's 2 sons. Later, Absalom rebels against his father and very nearly takes over the kingdom. One thing he tries to do to assert the fact that he is king in place of his father is he sets up a tent where he has sex with, I think it's 10 of his father's concubines openly in front of all of Israel. Another fulfillment of the prophecy that the prophet Nathan had given to David. In the battle for the throne, David insisted that Absalom not be harmed. Yet Absalom was killed. And that's a third son David lost. And David was emotionally overwhelmed when he heard that Absalom was dead. And it's one of the most emotional passages we have in the entire Bible. He says, "O Absalom, Absalom, would to God I had died for you, O Absalom, my son, my son." Even though Absalom has rebelled against him, David is emotionally distraught over losing Absalom. And I think when I hear him saying, "O Absalom, my son," I'm hearing him say, "This is all my fault." David started this whole thing by stealing Bathsheba and murdering Uriah. So David died having lost 3 sons. However, as his son Solomon became king, there was a bit of a battle for the throne with his brother Adonijah, and Adonijah made a request through his mom Bathsheba, through Solomon's mom Bathsheba, that Solomon interpreted to be a play to get the throne, and Solomon had Adonijah killed. So David lost 4 sons. Just as he said he must pay restitution 4-fold to the man in the parable, so it happened to him, and he lost 4 sons for his sin. The Bible does nothing to call your attention to the fact that David lost 4 sons, just as he said. It's easily figured out by reading the passages. So the prophecies of Nathan were fulfilled, and David's own judgment against himself was carried out. Again, this story starts in 2 Samuel 11 and goes for several chapters, and then the story of Solomon and Adonijah is in 1 Kings chapter 2.